So this is my testimony of how I received God's light through the gospel. I was fortunate enough to grow in a Christian home. I was fortunate enough to pretty much be in the church from day one, essentially. And so I heard a lot of things about God, but I really didn't really care too much about it. Um, was probably about 4 years old. We were having a barbecue in the backyard, and we had one of those little kind of ghetto, it was pretty much a ghetto barbecue. Wasn't it wasn't one of those fancy ones. It was real cheap barbecue type thing. We were celebrating the 4th of July, and I remember this gust of wind. It was kind of windy, and this gust of wind came and kind of blew out the fire that was starting to get going. And I remember being very, very angry at God. I remember shaking my fist and, towards the sky and, why did you blow out our barbecue? So from that time, I just had a really resentful attitude towards God. I really didn't care for him all that much. I know it seems silly, a little kid, thinking that God blew out his barbecue and carrying this grudge. But I really did. I really didn't have much of a favorable view of God at all. And probably about 5, my mother really started talking to me about the gospel and the gospel message. And I had I didn't want to hear any of it. I resisted. I was like, I never want to get saved. I never, didn't think I wanted anything to do with, this God. And that was my, I remember uttering those words, I never want to get saved. And those were my words. Funny thing is, probably, I don't know how long ago after that, I was 5, but we had, at that time we were going to a bigger church. And I liked the church because it was a big church, a lot of kids programs, a lot of fun activities to do as a kid. You have big kids group, a lot of friends, things of that nature. And we switched churches. We went to a smaller church that didn't have very many kids, didn't have a kids program, didn't really have, they had Sunday school, but and junior church, but it wasn't really a big thing. There wasn't a lot of kids, there wasn't a lot of fun toys or activities or, things that a kid would want. And so I really got angry at that. My younger sister liked it because in their nursery they had kind of the same type of stuffed dog that she loved. And so she liked that church. I didn't at the time. But it was at that church that God began to work. I mentioned about the Holy Spirit and how he really shows us our need of Jesus and really shows us how desperately we need him and tells us things and shows us who God is. And that's what happened one night. One night, I was in the service. I don't really remember much of what was said. I really don't. I don't even know if what was said was really impressing on things on my mind at that point. But as I was sitting there in that adult service, which typically I loathe, the fact that I was in an adult service instead of, with kids. This must have been like a Wednesday night. I think it was a Wednesday night, or a Sunday night. It could have either been Sunday night or Wednesday night service, because I know the Sunday morning service you had the kids, you had a kids program throughout all the 2 services. So this must have been, I know it was a night. So it must have been either Wednesday or Sunday night. And there was a special speaker. I'm not sure exactly, who he was. I don't really remember. But what I do remember is just this idea that this God who I hate loves me. And that was just what was going through my mind. The fact that I was being hateful towards this God loved me. and he came down and died on a cross for me. And that really, at that time, blew me away. And that caused me to love God. Instead of this resentment about the whole barbecue incident and perhaps other things in my life, that really drew me to Christ. That really drew me to want to get saved. And so I really wanted to get saved at that point. And so I asked my parents, I want to get saved. I do. And so they led me through the gospel. They told me the gospel, and I got saved that night. And I remember that night, just the peace, especially going to bed, just remembering that peace. Because as a little kid, I was always kind of frightened. I had a lot of different issues, behavioral issues, I think a lot of emotional problems. But I just remember that peace. Just remember that night, just being at total peace, when I was going to bed. Peace like I never really felt before. And I remembered just the change, just how I wanted nothing to do with God previous. And once I got saved, like, for example, previously, my previous dream job when I grew up was to be, like a pilot or something like that. I think that was my dream job at that point, or something to that effect. It's typical standard, kids, firemen, policemen type thing. Something like that. But when I got saved, at the age of 5, that immediately changed. I felt called into the ministry. Like that was what I was aiming towards, was the ministry. I felt God calling me in the ministry. That was my aim. And, I felt, there was just this fact that I was in love with God, that I loved Him. Instead of hating Him, I now loved God, and it was just the change and how my behavioral, emotional problems improved, and, to tell, everything that's happened since then. It's been probably about 21 years or so, 21 years, that I've been saved, and God's done a work in my life. And there are so many stories I could share, so many things that's happened. This journey of faith has been amazing. Wouldn't give it up for anything in the world. But it's definitely, that point was the defining moment, the changing moment. And so that's how God's light, the light of the gospel, really began to break into my life. And so I hope this video was an encouragement to you, and God bless.